My name is George, and I've always considered myself an ordinary guy. Nothing extravagant, nothing too wild. I've got a steady job in construction management, and my wife, Amelia, is a stay-at-home mom to our two kids, Leo, who's 9, and Gina, who's 7. We've been together for a little over a decade, and life has settled into a familiar pattern. Long workdays, family meals, after-school activities, bedtime routines, the whole suburban life. I won't pretend our marriage was some storybook romance, but honestly, whose is? Like any couple, we had our ups and downs. Amelia could be demanding, and I had my share of short-tempered moments, but I chalked it all up to the stress of parenting and managing a home. She had this strong-willed personality. Sometimes it made things exciting, other times it was downright draining, but I always saw it as part of her charm. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs, but at the time, they just didn't register. Amelia's behavior had started to shift, though not in any way I could immediately pinpoint. Around half a year ago, she signed up for a gym membership, saying she wanted to focus on her health and feel better about herself. I didn't think much of it. After all, what kind of husband wouldn't support his wife wanting to be healthier? Around the same time, she also started putting more effort into her appearance, dressing a little nicer than usual, but I figured she was just trying to reconnect with herself after years of full-time motherhood. Then there was the phone. Amelia had always been attached to it, but lately, it seemed like she guarded it with her life. I remember teasing her about it one night, joking that she must be running some top-secret government operation on that thing. She just laughed it off, saying she was scrolling through Pinterest and chatting with friends. I didn't push the issue. Why would I? Our physical connection had cooled over the last year or so, but I didn't think much of it. Between kids, work stress, and everyday life, things naturally slowed down after a while. Amelia had always been moody at times, so I assumed her distance was just part of her usual temperament. What really made things feel off was when she started going out more. Girls' nights, she called them. She claimed she was just meeting up with old friends, heading to a wine bar, or catching a late movie. I stayed home with the kids, made popcorn, watched cartoons, and tucked them into bed. I never questioned her once. I had absolute trust in her. But now, as I sit here piecing it all together, I can't believe how blind I was. How much I chose not to see. It was a Friday night, and after an exhausting day, all I wanted was to unwind on the couch with the kids. Work had dragged on, full of endless meetings and headaches, and I was looking forward to a simple evening. Leo was eager to build a Lego tower, while Gina had already pulled out a stack of her favorite picture books for me to read. Amelia had mentioned earlier that she had plans with friends again. As she got ready, she barely acknowledged me, giving the kids a quick kiss goodbye before heading for the door. She was more dressed up than usual, a tight black dress, heels clicking confidently against the hardwood floor, and a strong perfume that lingered long after she left. I remember making a light-hearted joke, saying she was making the rest of us look like slobs. She gave me one of those forced smiles, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes, and casually said, "Don't wait up." Something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me, but I shook it off. I had never been the jealous type, and Amelia had always loved attention. She thrived on admiration in a way I never fully understood, but I had never seen it as anything more than harmless. The kids and I spent the evening laughing and playing, and by the time the clock hit 9:45 p.m., they were tucked into bed, fast asleep. That's when the uneasy feeling crept in. Nothing obvious, just a vague sense that something was off. Maybe it was the way Amelia brushed me off earlier, or maybe my mind was just playing tricks on me after a long week. I tried to push it aside, flipping through TV channels and absent-mindedly scrolling through my phone, but the feeling only grew stronger. Around 10:45 p.m., I sent her a text, just something casual, "Hope you're having fun. What time do you think you'll be home?" The message sat unread. An hour passed, then another. Midnight rolled around, and the unease in my gut had turned into something heavier, more suffocating. I sent her another text, "Everything okay?" But still, nothing. Amelia wasn't the type to ignore me for this long, even when she was out. I debated calling her, but something held me back. Maybe pride, maybe not wanting to seem paranoid. By 11:40 p.m., I had enough. I grabbed my keys, stepped outside, and slid into my car. I wasn't even sure where I was going. Maybe a drive would clear my head, or maybe I just needed to get out of that empty house. The streets were quiet, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, as I aimlessly drove through town, my mind racing with thoughts I didn't want to have. Then I saw it. Her car. It was parked outside a small, dimly lit motel on the outskirts of town. The kind of place people only went when they had no better options. My stomach twisted, my hands tightening around the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she had car trouble and pulled over to call someone. Maybe she was helping a friend. But deep down, I already knew. I pulled over on the side of the road, taking slow, deliberate breaths as I stepped out. My legs felt heavy, like I was trudging through wet cement, but I kept moving, one step at a time, until I was standing outside room 17. And that's when I saw her. Through the thin motel curtains, I caught a glimpse of Amelia tangled in the sheets with another man. He was younger, lean, with tattoos running up his arms and a cocky grin that made me sick. She was laughing, her head thrown back, completely unaware that everything was about to come crashing down. I froze. My brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing, as if I had stumbled into some twisted scene from a bad movie. My first instinct was to storm inside, to rip that door open and demand answers. But instead, I just stood there, a strange calm washing over me, as if my body knew what my mind hadn't yet accepted. After what felt like an eternity, I finally turned away. I walked back to my car, slid into the driver's seat, and just sat there, staring at the dashboard, letting the image burn itself into my memory. I didn't cry. Not then. I didn't even feel anger. I just felt numb. By the time I finally drove home, the house was silent, the only sound being the soft breathing of my kids upstairs. I sat on the couch, phone in hand, staring at the screen as Amelia's text finally came through at 2:25 a.m. "Sorry, babe, just leaving now. Had a great time with the girls. Love you." I didn't respond. The morning after that soul-crushing discovery, I woke up feeling like a truck had flattened me in my sleep. My body felt heavy, my head a mess of chaotic emotions. Rage, humiliation, disbelief. I could hear the kids playing in the living room, their voices faint through the fog in my mind. For a few brief seconds, I let myself lie there, staring at the ceiling, hoping that maybe, just maybe, last night had been some twisted nightmare. It wasn't. Dragging myself out of bed felt like trying to move through quicksand. Every step toward the kitchen was a battle against the crushing weight in my chest. And there she was, Amelia, standing by the counter with a steaming cup of coffee in one hand, scrolling through her phone with the other, looking as if she didn't have a single care in the world. That calm, casual act, like nothing had happened, only made the fury inside me burn hotter. She finally glanced up and gave me one of those fake smiles, the kind that used to fool me. "Morning," she chirped, her tone light and sweet. "You're up late. The kids were asking about you." For a moment, I just stood there, my jaw tight, my fists clenching at my sides. How could she act so normal? How could she pretend nothing had happened after what I'd seen? The words slipped out before I could stop them. "Did you have fun last night?" My voice came out rougher than I intended. She barely reacted, just took another sip of coffee before glancing back at her phone. "Yeah, it was nice catching up with the girls. We stayed out later than planned, but you know how it is." She shrugged, completely unfazed, then looked up at me like she actually expected me to answer. "How about you? Did you and the kids have a good night?" The way she said it, like she wasn't hiding the worst betrayal of my life, made my stomach turn. I took a slow breath, trying to steady myself, but my voice still came out sharper than I meant. "Cut the act, Amelia. I'm not in the mood for this. Who were you really with?" That got her attention. She set her coffee down, her posture shifting slightly, but she recovered quickly. "What are you talking about, George?" she asked, her voice laced with carefully crafted innocence. "I told you. I was with the girls. Why are you acting so weird this morning?" I stepped closer, my heart hammering in my chest. "Don't lie to me again. I saw your car, Amelia, at the motel. You really thought I wouldn't notice?" For just a split second, her face went rigid, a flicker of panic flashing through her eyes before she quickly forced her expression back to neutral. I don't know what you're talking about. Her voice was colder now, sharper, her fingers tightening around the edge of the counter. My car wasn't at any motel. You must have seen someone else's. A bitter laugh slipped out before I could stop it. Don't insult my intelligence, I shot back. I saw you. I saw you with him. So stop pretending. The mask finally dropped. Her features twisted, and her voice turned acidic. Fine, she snapped. Yeah, I was there. And so what? That should have hurt. But at that moment, it didn't. She crossed her arms, her tone full of venom. You're not exactly a prize yourself, George. You're always working, always stressed. When was the last time you even looked at me like a woman? Not just the mother of your kids. Her words were meant to cut, but they only poured fuel on the fire. I took a step closer, my voice steady, but shaking with fury. You're really going to stand there and blame me? After everything I've done for this family, for you? You have the nerve to throw this in my face? She didn't back down, didn't even look guilty. Maybe if you weren't so boring, she shot back, eyes blazing, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. Did you ever think about that? Maybe if you actually paid attention to me. Enough. The roar that left my throat shook the kitchen, and for a second, her eyes widened in surprise. I was shaking now, barely able to contain myself. My hands itched to smash something, to let all this rage out. Don't you dare try to make this my fault, I growled. You did this. You destroyed our family. Not me. The sound of small footsteps made both of us freeze. Leo ran into the kitchen, clutching a crayon drawing in his tiny hands, his face beaming with pride. Look, Daddy, he said, his voice full of excitement. It's us at the park. I forced myself to kneel down, swallowing the lump in my throat. That's amazing, buddy, I said, my voice unsteady despite my best efforts. You're such a great artist. He grinned and ran off to show his sister, completely oblivious to the war raging between his parents. Amelia and I stood there in silence, the air so heavy it felt suffocating. My hands were still trembling, my chest tight with everything I wanted to say but couldn't. Finally, I met her gaze, my voice low and final. We're not doing this here. Not in front of the kids. She didn't argue, didn't try to justify it anymore. She just grabbed her coffee, turned on her heel, and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I stood there for what felt like forever, staring at the empty space where she'd been. My mind raced, my breath uneven, the weight of it all sinking in, deeper and deeper. There was no coming back from this. Not for us. The days after our confrontation felt like living in a pressure cooker. Every moment was a relentless cycle of rage, disbelief, and exhaustion. My mind refused to settle, constantly bouncing between memories of us as a family and the grotesque reality of what I had seen. I had always believed I knew Amelia inside and out, that I could read even the slightest change in her, but I had been blind. Worse than blind. I had been a fool. She, on the other hand, acted like nothing had happened. She moved through the house as if she hadn't set fire to everything we had built. She smiled at the kids, made small talk about meaningless things, even complained about the Wi-Fi, while I sat there, barely holding myself together. I couldn't look at her without my stomach twisting in disgust, couldn't hear her voice without my blood heating. But she had the audacity to carry on like I was the one disrupting her peaceful little world. I tried to keep my distance, but one night, after the kids had gone to bed, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I confronted her in the kitchen, demanding to know what her plan was, how she could stand there pretending everything was fine while sneaking around behind my back. She barely reacted, leaning against the counter, arms crossed, giving me that same smug, condescending look that made my hands clench into fists. She dismissed me as dramatic, insisting that I was blowing things out of proportion. The way she spoke, so calm and sure of herself, made me want to put my fist through the wall just to feel something real. I threw her lies back at her, spelling it out in plain terms. I had seen her, I had seen him, and there was no covering it up. For a split second, she hesitated, the flicker of panic in her eyes betraying her, but she recovered too quickly. She denied it outright, insisting I must have seen someone else's car. The way she lied so effortlessly, with no hesitation, no guilt, made my stomach churn. It was insulting. The bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. I had caught her, and still, she was going to pretend I was the crazy one. Finally, she dropped the act, snapping at me, admitting that, yes, she had been there. And then, as if the betrayal itself wasn't enough, she had the nerve to turn it on me, throwing out accusations like I had somehow pushed her into this. She accused me of neglecting her, claimed I had been too caught up in work, too focused on responsibilities, that I had stopped looking at her as a woman. Her words were meant to hurt, but all they did was pour gasoline on the fire inside me. I fired back, reminding her that everything I had done, every sacrifice, every long hour, every ounce of effort, had been for this family, for her. And now, after everything, she was telling me it wasn't enough? She rolled her eyes like my anger was nothing more than an inconvenience, like she was sick of hearing me talk. I wasn't the one who didn't get it, she was. She tried again, twisting the knife deeper, telling me that I had left her alone in this marriage, that I had pushed her away. And that was it. I walked out, slamming the door so hard it rattled the walls. My fists clenched until my knuckles ached. I sat in the dark, my breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts, while her words played over and over in my head. She was rewriting history, twisting herself into the victim while I sat here, drowning in the wreckage of something I had thought was solid. For the first time, I let myself accept the truth. There was nothing left to save. I couldn't take it anymore. The walls of the house felt like they were closing in, thick with a tension that never eased. Every attempt to process what had happened, or what was still happening, only led to more frustration. Amelia's audacity, her complete refusal to take responsibility, the way she lied so effortlessly as if it were second nature, it all churned inside me, making my blood boil. I needed to get out, even if it was just for a few hours. Without a word, I grabbed my jacket and walked out. The kids were already in bed, and Amelia didn't ask where I was going. Maybe she didn't care. Maybe she was relieved to have me out of the house. Either way, I didn't look back. The bar was only a few blocks away, the kind of dimly lit place where locals drowned their sorrows or sat in silence with a drink. I hadn't been there in years. It wasn't my usual scene. I had always preferred spending my evenings at home with the kids, or working late to keep things steady. But tonight, I needed the anonymity. I needed somewhere to sit, to think, to forget, if only for a little while. Sliding onto a stool at the far end of the bar, I avoided the groups of people lost in conversation. The bartender, a guy named Ronnie I vaguely remembered from high school, barely glanced up as he asked what I wanted. I muttered a request for whiskey, neat, not in the mood for small talk. He poured the drink and set it in front of me, wordless, like he could sense I wasn't there to chat. I appreciated that. The first sip burned on the way down, but at least it was a different kind of fire than the one that had been consuming me all week. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the amber liquid, letting the low hum of conversation drown out my thoughts. For the first time in days, the anger, the betrayal, the chaos in my head seemed to loosen its grip. But peace never lasted long. It started with a sound, familiar laughter, light and carefree, cutting through the noise like a blade. My grip tightened around the glass as I turned toward the entrance. And there she was. Amelia. She strolled in like she owned the place, her head held high, her laughter ringing through the room. And she wasn't alone. A man followed close behind her, his hand resting far too comfortably on the small of her back. He was tall, dressed too well for a rundown bar like this, his confidence pouring off him in waves. The way he leaned in when he spoke, lowering his voice just enough to make her tilt her head toward him, sent ice through my veins. She placed a hand on his arm, smiling at something he said, completely at ease, completely unbothered. She hadn't even waited for things to settle at home. If anything, she had escalated the chaos. The sight of them together was more than a slap in the face. It was deliberate, calculated. My chest tightened, my pulse hammering in my ears. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was Amelia making a choice, one she didn't regret. I tried to tell myself to let it go, to stay put, to walk away and deal with it later. But as I sat there, watching her lean into him, her body language so casual, so familiar. The fire inside me grew. Every laugh, every lingering glance, every single touch between them stoked the flames higher until I couldn't sit still any longer. Before I even realized what I was doing, I was on my feet, pushing through the crowd toward them. She saw me at the last second, her laughter cutting off, her expression flickering from amusement to annoyance in an instant. There was no shock, no guilt, just irritation, as if my presence was nothing more than an unwelcome interruption. The words came out before I could stop them, sharp and raw, spilling over from the rage I had been holding back for too long. I demanded to know what the hell she thought she was doing, here of all places, with him of all people. My voice carried across the bar, drawing glances from people nearby, but I didn't care. Amelia didn't flinch. She squared her shoulders, lips curving into that same smug smirk she had been throwing at me for weeks. She fed me more lies, more empty excuses, claiming it wasn't what it looked like, that I was blowing things out of proportion again. Her words meant nothing. Her tone was defensive, dismissive, like she was tired of having to explain herself to someone she no longer cared about. The man beside her finally decided to insert himself into the situation, placing a hand on Amelia's shoulder, telling me to calm down. His voice was smooth, too composed, like he had already decided I wasn't a threat. The way he looked at me, with indifference, with arrogance, was the last straw. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just swung. My fist connected with his jaw, the impact sharp and solid. The room exploded into chaos, gasps, shouts, the sound of chairs scraping against the floor, but I barely heard any of it. The man staggered back, clutching his face, his confidence shattered in an instant. Amelia screamed my name, her voice laced with anger, but I was already turning away, my decision made. I walked out of the bar without looking back, my heart pounding, my hands shaking with adrenaline and fury. The cool night air hit me like a slap, but it wasn't enough to clear my head. There was no going back from this. Whatever fragile hope I had been clinging to was gone. Amelia wasn't just reckless. She was cruel, and I was done pretending there was anything left worth saving. After the confrontation at the bar, I knew there was nothing left to salvage. The woman I had once known, or thought I knew, wasn't just gone. She had never really existed. What I had been clinging to all this time was nothing more than an illusion, and that realization cut deeper than anything else. The days that followed blurred together. My mind swung between anger and sadness, yet underneath it all, I felt an unsettling numbness. The house, once filled with life, now felt empty and unfamiliar. With the kids staying at my parents' place, safe from the chaos, I finally had the quiet I needed to think. But in that silence, I found no comfort, just echoes of the life I had lost and the painful truths I wasn't ready to face. Amelia tried to reach me, texts, calls, even showing up at the house unannounced. Each attempt was more of the same. Denials, excuses, desperate attempts to shift the blame. At first, I considered engaging, confronting her one last time, but what was the point? Her words meant nothing anymore. She had become background noise in a life I no longer recognized. That same week, I called a lawyer. Filing for divorce wasn't an easy decision, but it was the only choice left. There was no way to rebuild something so deeply broken, no path back to trust when it had been completely destroyed. More than that, I couldn't let my kids grow up in a home where resentment and betrayal lingered like a permanent shadow. Separating our lives turned out to be even messier than I had anticipated. Amelia fought me at every turn. Over the house, over custody, over anything she could twist into an argument. She threw out wild accusations, desperate to rewrite the narrative, to paint herself as the victim. I saw right through it, but that didn't make it any easier. Every battle drained me, chipped away at what little patience I had left. Through it all, the kids kept me grounded. They didn't deserve this war between their parents. No matter how tempting it was, I refused to badmouth Amelia in front of them. I kept my focus on making sure they felt loved and secure, even when everything else was falling apart. One day, they would see the truth for themselves, but that burden wasn't mine to place on their young shoulders. Months later, the divorce was finalized. Standing in that courtroom, hearing the judge declare it over, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, because the chaos was finally behind me. Sorrow, for the dreams that had died alongside our marriage. Moving on wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of it all felt like too much, when the anger and hurt resurfaced, threatening to pull me under. But there were also moments of clarity, tiny glimpses of a future I could finally start building for myself. Slowly, I began to piece my life back together. I found joy in my kids' laughter, in the little victories of each day, in the realization that I was no longer trapped in something that had been slowly destroying me. Most importantly, I learned to let go of the guilt. For too long, I had carried the weight of her betrayal like it was somehow my fault, but I finally understood that nothing I had done, or failed to do, justified what she had chosen. I stopped punishing myself for her actions and focused on being the father my children needed. Looking back now, I see how much I have grown through the pain. This wasn't a journey I would have chosen, but it shaped me in ways I never expected. The hardest decisions, I've learned, are often the ones that set you free. If there's one thing I can tell anyone going through something similar, it's this: trust yourself. You deserve honesty. You deserve respect. You deserve love, the kind that doesn't come with conditions or deceit. As for Amelia, I don't think about her much anymore. She became a closed chapter in my life, a lesson learned but not dwelled upon. My focus is on the future, on my kids, on finding peace, on living a life that is finally my own.